At first glance, it seems simple, an act of the body, a release of tension. Yet beneath that surface lies something far more intimate, more primal, more human. When we reach for ourselves in moments of solitude, most often it is not desire that drives us, but a yearning to feel something deeper: comfort, control, connection, escape. The hand may move, but it is the heart that is trembling. For so many people, the urge to masturbate arises not at the peak of joy but in the valleys of emotional unrest. It appears when the room is too quiet, when loneliness seeps into the walls, or when stress curls itself tightly round the spine. The impulse is not merely physical, it is emotional, even spiritual. We soothe ourselves because we are in pain, because something inside aches, and we may not know how else to tend to it. In that moment, the act becomes a ritual of self-regulation. It is our body's attempt to bring balance to the nervous system, to reduce the unbearable hum of anxiety or numb the dull ache of emptiness. But we rarely stop to see it that way. We treat it as dirty, shameful, or meaningless, when in reality it is one of the most honest expressions of our inner world. Think of the man who comes home to an empty apartment after working in a place where no one sees him. He is not just tired, he is invisible. When he reaches for himself, he is not just indulging in pleasure, he is reaching for something to feel. He is attempting to reclaim a moment of sensation that reminds him he is still alive. Or consider the woman raised in a household where her emotions were ignored and her body was a battlefield. For her, the act is not just private, it's forbidden, and yet irresistible. When she touches herself, she is not simply responding to desire, she is confronting years of shame, trying to create a space where her body belongs to her, where she doesn't need permission to feel. In these moments, masturbation becomes a form of emotional first aid. It is the internal voice saying, "You are overwhelmed, let me comfort you." But because the comfort is so fleeting, and the act so often tangled in secrecy, it leaves us emptier than we started. Not because it is wrong, but because it was never the real medicine. The wound needed affection, it needed connection, it needed someone to say, "You matter, I see you." But instead, we give ourselves a few seconds of relief, mistaking it for healing. And when it's over, the original ache often returns stronger than before. This cycle repeats not out of addiction to pleasure, but out of addiction to relief. The relief of not feeling anxious, the relief of not feeling lonely, the relief of not feeling powerless. We become dependent on this brief escape because it works for a moment. But like all coping mechanisms, it eventually loses its effect unless we address the deeper need it is trying to soothe. And yet, we rarely stop to ask the question, what am I actually feeling? Before I do this, what part of me is crying out right now? The body knows. The nervous system knows. It remembers the heartbreaks you forgot. It remembers the nights you cried yourself to sleep at age 10. It remembers the humiliation of being shamed, the sting of being touched too early or not held enough. These experiences live inside the body, and when you are alone, overwhelmed, and disconnected, your body may attempt to express what your words cannot. It tries to calm itself the only way it knows how. To see masturbation through this lens is not to vilify it but to understand it, to sit with it honestly, to remove the shame, not by glorifying the act, but by listening to what it's trying to tell you. So many of us live in emotional deprivation. We walk through life starving for touch, craving attention, desperate for softness, and unable to ask for it in real life. So we go inward, we simulate it, we imitate what we think love should feel like, if only for a few minutes. But what happens when the simulation replaces the search for the real thing? What happens when our nervous systems become so addicted to this brief reprieve that we forget how to seek authentic connection? This is where the emotional cost becomes visible. We think we're satisfying desire, when in truth, we're silencing need. And that need doesn't go away. It waits, it festers, it drives our loneliness deeper. None of this is to say the act is inherently wrong or shameful. Quite the opposite. The act, when conscious, when intentional, can be part of a healthy relationship with the self, but when done unconsciously, in moments of emotional distress, it becomes less about pleasure and more about pain management. And when we never stop to ask why, we lose the chance to use the act as a mirror for the soul. So ask yourself, what is really going on inside me before I reach for this? Is it anxiety? Is it sadness? Is it boredom? Is it heartbreak? And then ask, what would it mean to meet that emotion directly instead of avoiding it? Could I call a friend? Could I cry? Could I journal? Could I walk? Could I just sit with it? The truth is, what you are really doing when you masturbate, more often than not, is trying to soothe an invisible wound. That wound might be recent, or it might be ancient, but either way, it longs to be seen, not silenced. You do not need shame to change. You need awareness. You need compassion. And you need the courage to face the ache that lies beneath the impulse. Because when you do, the act becomes something new, not a desperate release, but a reflection. And with reflection comes the possibility of healing. There is a moment, just before the impulse arises, where something cracks open inside you, something subtle, something almost imperceptible. You feel a shift, a dull ache behind your ribs, a vague sense of disconnection. You don't always recognize it for what it is, but it's the first signal. It's not lust that arrives first, it's loneliness. It's not desire, it's discontent. And this is the part no one talks about, the part we tend to ignore or dismiss, because we've been taught to view this impulse as merely biological. We've been conditioned to believe that the body calls out for stimulation, in the same way hunger calls for food. But the truth is far more complex. The body, when left alone with unresolved emotional residue, becomes an echo chamber. It reflects what we try to avoid. When your needs go unmet for too long, when you're emotionally malnourished, when you've silenced your own longing for love and understanding, your body will try to speak. And when it speaks, it doesn't always use words. It uses sensations. It uses urges. It uses instinct. What you call horniness might sometimes be the final cry of your neglected inner child, saying, I feel unwanted, I feel invisible, I feel scared. But since many of us were never taught to name these emotions, to validate them, or to sit with them, we turn to what gives quick relief. And so, the act becomes a kind of bypass. Let's take a real example. A man in his 30s sits alone in his apartment, scrolling through photos of women on social media. He's not in a relationship. He hasn't had a meaningful connection in months, maybe years. He doesn't feel like going out. He's tired of the world. But he also doesn't want to feel this emptiness, this low-grade despair that follows him through each day. So he turns to the screen. He creates a fantasy, stimulates the body, and finishes in a rush of dopamine. For a brief moment, he feels something, anything. But minutes later, the emptiness returns, stronger, more pronounced, not because what he did was evil or disgusting, but because it didn't actually meet the real need. The need was not orgasm, it was belonging, it was affection, it was witnessing. We often confuse physical release with emotional nourishment, but one cannot replace the other. You cannot feed a starving heart with a chemical reaction. You can distract it, you can numb it, but you cannot heal it that way. This is where people fall into loops. They repeat the act not out of increasing desire, but out of increasing alienation from themselves. And every time they reach for the illusion, they lose a little more connection to the truth. There's also shame. The shame compounds, because, deep down, something within us knows we are not just chasing pleasure, we are chasing love, chasing presence, chasing some version of wholeness. And when we realize that this ritual is not delivering the fullness we secretly hope for, the disappointment can feel like self-betrayal. The shame does not stem from the act, it stems from the unmet longing beneath the act, and our inability to meet it with honesty. And then comes the mind, layering in more confusion. It rationalizes, it shames, it moralizes. We tell ourselves we are weak. We punish ourselves for being human. We believe something is broken within us, but nothing is broken. In fact, the very reason the urge arises is because something within you is alive and reaching for connectio. And something inside you knows there is more. The tragedy is not the longing, it's that we settle for such a fleeting substitute when what we truly desire is sacred, enduring, and real. We must also speak about trauma, because for many, masturbation has become a coping mechanism for trauma stored in the body. Those who were neglected as children, those who were touched without consent, those who grew up in homes where touch was either violent or absent. They often carry an invisible wound that pulses in silence. The body remembers, the nervous system reacts, and in adulthood, the impulse to self-stimulate can be the nervous system's confused attempt at regulation. But instead of recognizing it as such, we blame ourselves. We call it addiction. We call it sin. We call it weakness, when in fact, it may simply be the body's confused attempt to soothe the unspeakable. In those cases, the act becomes not only a mirror but a messenger. It's telling you, there's pain here. Please don't ignore it. That's why it's not enough to say, just stop doing it. That's like telling a drowning man to stop gasping for air. The deeper work is not in the suppression of the urge, but in understanding its origin. What is it trying to cover? What wound is it dressing? What part of your story have you never been allowed to grieve? The impulse can be a gateway if we have the courage to approach it with curiosity rather than condemnation. You can use it as a moment of inquiry. Ask, what do I need right now emotionally? What am I feeling that I don't want to feel? What conversation have I avoided with myself? When you start doing this, you begin to reclaim power over your own healing. You begin to replace unconscious reaction with conscious reflection. Let this be your moment of turning, not into guilt, not into denial, but into intimacy with your own truth. You are not broken for seeking relief. You are human for wanting to feel whole. But you deserve more than 10 seconds of escape. You deserve an entire life of presence. When you stop, breathe, and look beneath the surface of your actions, you begin to see your own soul speaking, and it has always been trying to reach you not through shame, but through longing. There's a strange paradox that lies at the heart of human sexuality. It's the belief that something so profoundly physical can exist entirely separate from the soul. But this belief is a kind of illusion, one that keeps people circling the surface of their own lives without ever diving into the deeper ocean beneath. You may think you are engaging with your body, but what you are really doing, in many moments of self-pleasure, is negotiating with the unseen aspects of your psyche. You are entering into an unconscious conversation with your unmet needs, hidden fears, forgotten memories, and spiritual hunger. When the moment arises, when the hand reaches out, when the body stirs, when the craving rushes in, it often feels automatic. It can come with such force that it seems like the only option is surrender. But what drives this motion is not merely libido. What drives it is often something older, something rooted in a wound that never received a voice. For many people, masturbation is not a celebration of self. It is a silent escape from the self, an attempt to avoid the rawness of life. And in this avoidance, there is often an undercurrent of grief, not always visible, not always conscious, but always present, like a shadow following behind. There is a young woman who curls up in bed each night and reaches for herself, not because she is full of joy, but because she is empty of affection. She scrolls past images of smiling couples, people laughing at parties, friends wrapped in arms that say you matter. And though she tells herself she's fine alone, her body tells a different story. It whispers, please, let me feel something. And so, she gives herself the briefest simulation of love, not real love, but something that tricks the brain into silence, just for a while. But when the moment ends, so does the illusion, and what returns is the echo, the same emptiness she tried to quiet, the same loneliness, now laced with guilt. She doesn't hate her body, she hates the ache, and she doesn't know how to heal it. This is the silent crisis of many people's inner worlds. They don't know what they're actually seeking. They believe it's pleasure, but what they are truly craving is intimacy, not sexual intimacy, but emotional and spiritual closeness, the kind that says, I see you, I hear you, you are not invisible. We live in a world where genuine human connection has become increasingly rare. We swipe past faces as if they were products. We text instead of talk. We consume fantasies because real relationships feel too difficult or dangerous. And in that digital fog, we forget how to feel each other. We forget how to be seen. So we compensate. And we call this compensation freedom. But freedom without connection is just isolation dressed in prettier clothes. We touch ourselves, but we are starved of real touch. We create pleasure, but we are untouched by presence. And so, the cycle repeats. There is a part of you that knows this, A deep and ancient part that remembers what it felt like to be held, without needing to perform, to be loved without needing to hide. And every time you go through this act without love, without intention, without care, it feels like a betrayal of that part of you. That is why some people feel sadness afterward, or guilt, or numbness, not because the act itself is wrong, but because the soul feels left out. When we bypass the soul in pursuit of release, we miss an opportunity. The opportunity is not to become pure by avoiding desire. That is another trap. The opportunity is to become conscious of the desire, to examine it, to sit with it long enough that it starts telling you its real name. Because desire, at its root, is not evil. It is sacred. It is the compass of the soul pointing you toward what is missing. For example, someone might feel an overwhelming urge to self-pleasure every time they are rejected. Not because the rejection aroused them, but because the rejection reactivated an old narrative, I'm not wanted. And rather than feel the weight of that belief, rather than grieve the pain of being unseen, they reach for the one place where they can create their own experience of being wanted, even if it's a fantasy, even if it's temporary. In that act, they are not engaging with lust, they are engaging with abandonment. They are not chasing sensation, they are avoiding humiliation. But the moment passes, and the old pain remains, tucked just beneath the surface, waiting to rise again. When you begin to look at yourself through this lens, everything changes. You start to understand that you are not shameful, or addicted, or weak. You are unhealed. You are still carrying unmet needs in your nervous system, and those needs are trying to speak. The body never lies. It will tell you over and over again when something is out of balance. But we have been trained to ignore its wisdom and label it instead. We call it lust. We call it sin. We call it addiction. But what if we called it a message? What if the urge was not a curse, but a teacher? When we bring intention into the space of desire, everything becomes sacred again. The touch becomes conscious. The breath becomes a prayer. The body becomes a temple of truth rather than a battle ground of shame. But to get there, we must first stop running from ourselves. We must stop numbing every uncomfortable feeling the moment it arises. We must be willing to feel, to listen, to love ourselves even in our most desperate, hungry, lonely moments, because in those moments we are not broken, we are simply waiting to come home. There comes a point in the journey where one must ask, what am I truly seeking? Beneath the rituals, beneath the distractions, beneath the automatic behaviors that feel so urgent in the moment, what is it that I truly want? This question becomes especially important when we explore our relationship with self-pleasure. For many, it is an act so habitual, so private, so layered in silence, that they have never paused to ask, what part of me is driving this? And more importantly, what part of me is being silenced because of it? Every act of masturbation is a form of communication with the self, whether conscious or unconscious. It is a doorway that either leads us deeper into awareness or buries us further in illusion. This is not about morality, it's about alignment. The act, in itself, is not inherently right or wrong. It is a mirror, and the reflection it offers depends entirely on the intention behind it. There are those who use it as a way to numb, to avoid, to quiet the storm inside. When loneliness whispers too loudly, when anger boils beneath the surface, when the weight of existence becomes too much to bear, and there is no one to hold us, no one to witness our aching, the body becomes the anesthetic, the urge becomes the escape, and in that escape, the soul is left unheard. But what if this act was never meant to silence the soul? What if it was meant to awaken it? There's a story about a man who had everything: success, money, social approval, but each night, he would return home and feel a gnawing emptiness. He would open his phone, scroll through explicit images, and attempt to chase away the hollow feeling by touching himself into forgetfulness. Yet every climax left him lonelier. His body responded, but his spirit wept. He thought he was broken. What he didn't realize was that his body was simply following a script he had inherited from a world that teaches disconnection, a world that says the body is separate from the soul. A world that teaches pleasure as consumption, not communion. This is where the wound lies for many of us, not in the act itself, but in the absence of presence during it. We become split within. We engage with ourselves physically while our hearts are 1,000 miles away, our minds filled with fantasy, our emotions bypassed, our core untouched. We chase stimulation, but avoid intimacy, even with ourselves. So many of us were never taught how to be with ourselves, how to hold our own pain, how to feel safe in our own skin. Masturbation becomes a shortcut to comfort, a counterfeit of connection. And in that repetition, we begin to train the brain not just to seek pleasure, but to expect dissociation, to turn away from ourselves the moment something too uncomfortable rises. But the discomfort is the doorway. The discomfort is where the healing begins. When you feel the urge to pleasure yourself, pause, not to shame it, not to stop it, but to listen. Ask, what am I really needing in this moment? Is it tenderness? Is it validation? Is it touch? Is it release from stress, from sadness, from the unbearable noise in your head? When you begin to name the real need behind the urge, you take your power back, you stop reacting, and start relating. There is nothing wrong with desire. It is sacred. But when it is cut off from our emotional truth, it loses its power to transform. Instead of being an act of healing, it becomes a repetition of abandonment. The body learns that even in moments of pleasure, the soul will not be included. Over time, this leads to emotional disconnection. And that disconnection shows up everywhere. Relationships become shallow. Intimacy feels frightening. Vulnerability becomes a threat. The goal is not abstinence. The goal is awareness. Conscious self-pleasure can be a deeply healing act when done with intention, love, and presence. When you touch yourself with reverence, with curiosity, with kindness, you begin to rewire your nervous system. You teach your body that pleasure and presence can coexist. You teach your mind that you are worthy of attention, even when no one else is watching. You teach your soul that it is welcome, even in moments where you used to run. There's a profound difference between stimulation and connection. One is short-lived, the other is transformative. The first may quiet the body, but the second awakens the self. When you include your breath, when you slow down, when you touch your skin like it belongs to someone you love, everything shifts. What was once a mindless escape becomes a ritual of self-communion, a way of saying, I am here, I am listening, I will not abandon myself anymore. This shift is not easy. There will be days when the old patterns call louder, when numbness feels safer than presence, when fantasy feels more manageable than reality. But if you can stay with yourself even in those moments, if you can stay curious rather than judgmental, you are already healing. Healing is not about perfection, it's about presence. It's about choosing to feel rather than flee. And when you do this over and over again, you begin to notice something miraculous. You begin to feel whole. You begin to experience your own body not as an object to be used, but as a vessel for sacred truth. You begin to look at your urges not as enemies, but as messengers. And you begin to realize that the thing you've always been searching for is not out there, not in another person, not in a video, not in a climax, but within you. You are not here to be at war with your body. You are not here to carry shame for your desires. You are here to remember, to return, to reclaim the parts of yourself that got lost in the noise. So the next time the urge comes, take a moment, breathe, place your hand over your heart, and say gently to yourself, I hear you. I'm not running anymore. I'm coming home.